Now, I asked myself this question recently. I was like, Holly, do you actually have a personal hygiene routine? I kind of answered no immediately to the question, but then when I thought about it, I was like, you know, I actually do quite a few things either daily or weekly or every month that contribute to, you know, a personal hygiene routine. So I thought I would share with you guys some of the things that I do without even thinking, because they're just like habits now. Right? A lot of these things we don't talk about even in schools, in our conversations, in our friendship groups, in our day-to-day conversations. So I really hope this video is fun and interesting to watch and listen to. Definitely a like it if you do enjoy it. Comment down below if you have any questions, subscribe if you are new, and as always, we'll dive straight into the video. So we're going to talk about brushing teeth. Now, the first thing to say is obviously I brush my teeth twice a day. That is recommended. But the main controversy in this field is whether you brush before or after you eat breakfast. Now, this one is interesting because there isn't a scientific consensus. Basically, people postulate, you know, the pros and cons of each, and they're just theoretical, really. Personally, I grew up brushing my teeth after breakfast, straight away pretty much. However, over the past 5-6 years, I swapped to brushing before breakfast, and now I'm kind of back to brushing after breakfast, but I wait 30 minutes, which is really important if you are choosing to do it after breakfast, which I will explain. So our teeth, we know they're coated in enamel, which is the protective outer coating. It doesn't contain cells, but it's mostly made of hydroxyapatite. So this is crystallized calcium phosphate. You know, when you wake up in the morning, that's when you have a lot of bacteria in your mouth because it's been accumulating overnight and you haven't been producing as much saliva. So if you brush first thing, then you're going to get rid of those bacteria that A, cause a bad breath, and also they're waiting for sugars to metabolize into acid. So if you don't brush before breakfast, those bacteria will be able to feed on the carbohydrates and the sugars in your breakfast, create acids, and then that may lead to cavities as it starts to break down enamel. And then the second reason in support of brushing before is that toothpaste contains fluoride, which adds this protective layer to your teeth to protect against decay and cavities from the acidic food. And thirdly, brushing also stimulates saliva flow, so that helps to neutralize acidity in your mouth, and it also helps to remineralize your enamel. However, you know, if you brush afterwards, the main thing to do is to wait at least 30 minutes. Some dentists will say at least an hour you should wait. And the reason why you should wait, they say, is because the drinks that you have at breakfast or the foods you eat, they are acidic, and that can cause the softening and the breakdown of your enamel and causing cavities again. And so if that's going to be a problem for you, say you have to rush out the door to go to work, maybe it is best to brush before, and then afterwards you can always floss, you can rinse your mouth with water or even use mouthwash just to freshen up. Another thing to say about brushing afterwards is that, you know, that toothpaste that you use on your mouth afterwards will be effective for a longer period because the fluoride won't be displaced by the foods you eat during breakfast. But as I said, there are kind of reasons for and against both. Overall, you just need to pick one that is best for you. If you brush your teeth twice a day, regardless of whether you do it before or after you eat breakfast, 30 minutes after, it doesn't matter as long as you don't forget and you do it twice a day. Related to toothbrushing then is tongue scraping. Now, this is something I have not done for the majority of my life. I literally started doing it this year in 2023 when I'm posting and making this video. This is my little tongue cleaner. I actually think it's so cute. I bought it when I was in Thailand, in Chiang Mai. The reason why tongue scraping is so good is because on your tongue, bacteria can accumulate and they will break down sulfur containing amino acids into what we call volatile sulfur compounds, which is a main cause of halitosis or bad breath. So if you remove that bacteria, you're more likely to have a beautiful smelling breath. Tongue scraping can also promote good oral health overall, so it can help reduce your risk of tooth decay and gum disease. This is a little bit TMI, but I have massive tonsils and I get what are called tonsil stones. Bacteria basically accumulate in the crevices of my tonsils because they're massive and they have so many crevices. They're like a maze. So I deal with that. I have to get them out. I'm not going to tell you how I do it because I wouldn't recommend you do it. But since tongue scraping, I haven't had any tonsil stones, which is really good for me. Obviously, this is just my personal experience. So there are studies out there that kind of compare tongue scraping by using an actual tongue scraper that can be metal or plastic versus a toothbrush. The studies are kind of conflicting and they say different things. Like certain studies will claim that a tongue scraper is better, others will say that there's no difference and it's just simply the act of mechanically tongue scraping that is beneficial. So at this point I would just pick whatever works for you. You have to get used to doing it. The first few times I did it, I was actually so bad because it will stimulate your gag reflex, especially when you go right to the back. I think I have improved, so I am going to show you guys this morning. I don't normally do it in the morning. Don't scrape too hard because, you know, you don't want to rip your tongue. But a little bit of force scraping action. It's great. Number 3 then is I use a natural and odorless deodorant after every shower that I have. So I use Salt of the Earth, which is from Holland & Barrett, and it's basically potassium alum. It's a natural mineral and it's potassium aluminium sulfate essentially. I did not drop this, okay? I leave this outside the shower, so I use it every time I shower afterwards when my skin is still wet or damp. But Milka comes into this room and she knocked it off and it smashed, which is so annoying because it was really sharp and painful when I first started using it, but it does like get smooth again. These things, you know, if you do drop them, they will crack. They last such a long time. Now we all know that we sweat, but a lot of people get confused and think that sweat itself is what causes odor, but it's actually the bacteria that thrive in that environment, and it's the bacteria basically that cause the odor. Now we have antiperspirants and we have deodorants these days. Antiperspirants, they prevent you from sweating, they like block pores, but a deodorant on the other hand, it aims to like prevent you from smelling, so it either tries to kill the bacteria or just like neutralize the smell. But these days in deodorants there are a lot of harsh chemicals that are used, and a lot of them, you know, have scents to them. Scented deodorants and those with a lot of chemicals in, they just made me smell and it made it worse. And I have always had this Salt of the Earth deodorant, but I just never used it consistently, and I never really started using it until I realized that it was actually really effective. Now the potassium alum in this deodorant, those crystals are too large to actually penetrate your skin and to block your pores, so you're still going to sweat when you wear this deodorant. But what it does is it creates this layer, this salt layer over your armpit, and that forms best when your armpit is moist, hence why I apply this every time I shower. And what that does is it will limit bacterial growth in the sweat on your armpit. So if you limit their growth, you're going to limit the production of odor, because as I said, it's not your sweat that's causing the smell, it's the bacteria. The only other thing that I have used, it's Nude, it's an anti-odorant, and I took this with me traveling last year because it's a tiny tube, it's really light and super concentrated, so you just put it on, and yeah, it's odorless as well, but I found that this did not make me smell and also worked really effectively. So we're dramatically changing topics right now. Number 4 on my list is weeing after sex. Now I was never told this at school, but essentially if you do have sex, you should go to the toilet, wee within at least like 30 minutes. Now the reason why you should do that, especially as a female, is because of our anatomy and to reduce the risk of UTIs, so a urinary tract infection. Note that this does not prevent against STIs, and the reason why you need to do this is because by weeing you're going to flush out any pathogens or potential pathogens that could get into your urinary system and cause that UTI. Now in males, the urethra, which is the tube through which wee leaves the body, their urethra is a lot longer. In females, our urethra is a lot shorter, and so the bacteria might not be flushed out, they might get to your bladder and cause that UTI. So please, if you do have sex, just remember to go to the toilet, like don't fall asleep afterwards. And if your sexual partner, your boyfriend, whoever it may be, doesn't know that, please inform them and tell them that you need to go to the toilet after having sex. It's really important, otherwise you will get a UTI, and nobody wants a UTI. The next thing I need to tell you guys is if you see a product that is marketed as a cleaning product, a perfume, a soap for your vagina, please do not use it. Your vagina is the internal part of your female genitals and the vulva is the external portion. And the really cool thing about your vagina is that it is self cleaning, okay? You do not need to clean your vagina, the internal portion. Discharge is normal. That is a sign that your vagina is cleaning itself. So that means no soaps, no deodorants, no perfumes, nothing like that. Just let it do its thing, okay? Now, if you want to clean the vulva, which is the external part, you can use like warm water, a very gentle soap, but just be careful because it is close to your vagina. You don't want anything to go up there. And your vagina, it has its own natural odor. Don't try and get rid of it. It also has its own microflora and it has its own set pH, so you do not want to disrupt that balance. You know, you'll disrupt the microflora, which might lead to infections. You might dry out your vagina, disrupt the natural pH, so cause it to actually start smelling, which sounds counterintuitive, but that's because it's self-cleaning. The next few points I'm going to talk about are to do with periods, and I have made other videos about periods on my channel. I can link some of those down below for you guys. But the first thing I will say is that I now love period underwear. So I still use a menstrual cup, which I'm going to talk about, but I also use period underwear alongside, and I have been doing for about just under a year now. I have loads of different pairs of period underwear. These are my green ones. Actually, one of my favorite pairs. I wear these a lot when I'm like working out and on my period. But yeah, they're all from Snugs basically because I worked with them over on Instagram. Love the brand and the company, and I think their underwear is great. Obviously, I use period underwear when I'm on my period, sometimes alongside my menstrual cup, especially if my flow is heavy. And I also use it if I have any like discharge or like a bit of spotting between my periods. And what I will say is, before you wash your period underwear, it is good to get into a habit of just like rinsing it before you put it into the wash. The second point to do with your period then is to track your period. Okay, now tracking I think is so useful, and I haven't yet really found an app that I like using. I kind of swap between a few apps. You know, you can track obviously when you come on your period, but you can also track symptoms alongside, like abdominal cramps, backache, headaches, bloating. Put it all into this tracker and you can get to know your cycle. You can get to know whereabouts you are and understand why your body is doing certain things or why you're feeling a certain way. And if you ever go and see like a gynecologist, they will always ask you when your last period is. And then the more data the app or whatever you're using has, you know, it's gonna more accurately predict your next period. And say if you miss a period, you might want to get a pregnancy test done. And if you have irregular periods, you can obviously see that if you track your period. That might be a sign of stress or like overactivity or even something more serious like PCOS. So my third and final point to do with periods is all about my menstrual cup, just because I feel like there is a lot of mixed data in this area and a lot of people are still very scared to even try using a menstrual cup. So I have made a couple of videos about menstrual cups. I will also leave those linked down below, but I just wanted to focus specifically here on like the use of my menstrual cup when I sterilize it and how often you should change it, in particular in the context of what's called toxic shock syndrome. Toxic shock syndrome is a very severe multi-organ disease. It is most often associated with the use of tampons, especially those that are very or highly absorbable. It's caused by this particular toxin, but you need to start with a bacterial infection first of all, and that's usually with a pathogen called Staphylococcus aureus or Streptococcus pyogenes. But in the majority of cases, it's a toxin which is called toxic shock syndrome toxin 1 or TSST1, and it acts as what we call a super antigen. Now this super antigen, what it does is it causes overactivation of T cells, which are a particular type of white blood cell, and that will cause like too much inflammation, the release of loads of cytokines, and that is what causes the multi-organ failure, which as I said can be really severe and can potentially be fatal. Now a tampon basically absorbs blood, and with toxic shock syndrome, what the tampon can do is it can encourage the growth of bacteria that cause toxic shock syndrome, and because it dries out the vagina, it can cause like small abrasions which can allow bacteria to enter the bloodstream and then release that toxin to cause toxic shock syndrome. And then if we think about a menstrual cup, it's not absorbing blood, it's collecting blood. Now proponents of menstrual cups, they claim that there is a lower risk of toxic shock syndrome when using a menstrual cup in comparison to a tampon. However, I just want to discuss some of the controversies and why we should always still take precautions when using menstrual cups. Even if the risk is lower when you're using a menstrual cup, it still doesn't mean there's no risk of toxic shock syndrome. So the first case of toxic shock syndrome associated with a menstrual cup was first reported in 2015, and a study in 2018 actually found that certain types of menstrual cups increase the growth of bacteria and the production of the toxin that causes toxic shock syndrome. Now, they claim that that might have been because of the experimental procedure that they used. So because of the cup, it meant that there was more oxygen in this kind of system they were using to measure bacterial growth and toxin production, and the increase in oxygen encouraged more bacterial growth. But what that study basically indicated was that larger menstrual cups might encourage more bacterial growth and toxin production than smaller ones. Now with a tampon, as I said, it encourages bacterial growth, and that's because some of the substances used in tampons, they can act as agar jelly, so they can like really encourage bacterial growth. And then if we contrast that with a menstrual cup, most of them are made of like medical grade materials like silicone, for example, which don't encourage bacterial growth. But it doesn't mean to say that bacterial growth can't occur in the blood in the cup. But to make this even more complicated, there is conflicting data. Like that 2018 study conflicts with data from one which showed that the production of the toxin was lower in menstrual cups compared to the tampon. And it's like, well, are menstrual cups safe? So if I had to answer this question, obviously I'm not a doctor, but I have a biology degree and I've looked at data. I would say they are safe to use, but you still need to take precautions. You need to change your menstrual cup at least every 4 to 12 hours depending on the heaviness of your flow, the volume of blood that is coming out and being collected. Ideally, you don't want your menstrual cup to fill to the top and start overflowing, because that is when blood is going to start coming into contact with the walls of your vagina, and if there is bacteria in that blood, then they might be able to traverse the vaginal walls, get into your bloodstream in your body, and then, you know, cause toxic shock syndrome theoretically. Now that might be quite difficult if you're trying to use a small menstrual cup, because as I said before, there is data to maybe indicate that smaller cups are better than larger cups. That might mean you need to change it more often, but when you are changing it, you have to just make sure you've washed your hands, and then when you remove it, rinse it with water and then reinsert it. If you want to, you could have 2 menstrual cups during your period and just alternate between them. I will sterilize my menstrual cup before and after my period ends. You can either boil it in a pan, put it in some boiling water, leave it for 10 to 12 minutes, or you can get a menstrual cup sterilizing pot and you just put that in the microwave, add some water, and it will be sterilized for you very quickly and discreetly. It's really good for traveling. But the data is mixed, as I said. I personally would stay away from highly absorbable tampons, but like with your menstrual cup, just be careful. I definitely think they're safe to use, but that's not to say, as I said before, that you shouldn't still take precautions. The next thing to talk about is something that deserves a whole entire video for itself, but I just want to briefly touch upon STIs and STI testing, because I know that STIs, or sexually transmitted infections or diseases, they have a huge stigma associated with them, and that's why a lot of people don't get tested enough for STIs, and so they'll end up carrying something and passing it on to someone else. There are loads of different types of STIs. They can cause a lot of different symptoms like warts, rashes, pain when passing urine, and a lot of them don't even have any symptoms, so you won't know if you're carrying something. But the bottom line is that more STI testing is better than not testing at all. You can get free at-home test kits which are super discreet. I've done those before. They can test against the common STIs, so like chlamydia, gonorrhea, also things like HIV and syphilis. I've also had STI testing alongside me getting my Gynafix fitted, and you should especially look to get tested if you think you've been exposed to an STI, or like you've recently changed sexual partners. But as I said, like there's no harm in getting tested and just making sure you're not carrying anything, because in females, you know, it can lead to long-term reproductive issues. So the 2 final things in my, you know, personal hygiene routine, as it were, I don't have too much to say about these, but the first is nail clipping, or just like trimming my nails. And for my whole life I've basically used scissors, but recently I started to actually use nail clippers. I don't know if it's strange to use scissors. If I'm not the only person, please do let me know, but otherwise I will continue to just use both. And the last thing is about hair care. Now you guys have to let me know if you want like a full hair care routine explained, or like a skincare routine. You know, I recently made a video about laser hair removals, and I am going to be making a video about laser eye surgery, like reviewing that whole process. But hair washing and my little hair care routine, I've said this before, I am a very dry human being, so my scalp is very dry, and how often you hair wash is very much dependent on you personally. Like, are you dry like myself, or do you produce more natural oil, and so do you wash it more often or more frequently? But what I would say is, please don't wash your hair every single day. It will just strip your hair of its natural oils, and it will make your hair like dry, more prone to split ends, flaky, and it's just not good for your hair, especially if you're using like harsh shampoos and conditioners, especially shampoos with like sulfates and silicones. I do not use products now that contain those ingredients. I also only really wash my hair with shampoo and conditioner like once every 3 weeks maybe on average. I do like rinse my hair with water, especially if I'm working out and I'm sweaty, but like I'll wash my hair when it starts to actually get greasy, which is after about 3 weeks. But as I said, I can go into more detail in a full hair care routine. You guys have to let me know, but I hope you have enjoyed this video anyway. Definitely like this video if you did enjoy it. Comment down below with any further questions and video ideas. If you're new, you can subscribe, and as always, I will speak to you very soon in another video. Bye guys. My nose is itchy. I feel like my bun is always like wonky in some way. Focus, 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 focus. Angelo had a tongue screener. Tongue screener? Can I even talk? Apparently not. And then I'm gonna be making a video about laser eye removal. Laser eye removal? Absolutely not. It's just so good. Other than when Milka decides to knock it off and smash it. We are back in a jumper. Literally, this is my prime season, jumper season. Okay, hello, hello, hello. I have knickers here.